Hi, and welcome to the Dr. Karl Calendar Visiting Writer Series show. My name is Suzanne Parker. I'm part of the English faculty here at Brookdale, where I direct our creative writing program. I'm so excited to have on the show today Karl Michael Iglesias, an actor, director, and poet. He's from Milwaukee, and he has published extensively and also has over a decade of experience as a teaching artist. His new book is called Catch a Glow and came out from Finishing Line Press. So welcome. Thanks for joining us, Karl.
Thank you.
This is an amazing book. It has so much energy. It leaps off the page.
Thank you.
I was just wondering if, in a general, could you tell us about it?
Yeah, absolutely. It is my first effort as an author, which is very exciting. And it comes from a sense of activism. Around the time Hurricane Maria was happening, and it was also the Trump presidency, in the early stages of the Trump presidency, so there was a lot of torn feelings that I was feeling at the time. I also had just moved to New York, and it was clear that there was a large disconnect that was happening on the island, in the sense of the power outage, of course, but the power outage then led to a lack of communication in a lot of the forms that
This is the power outage from Hurricane Maria.
Yep, absolutely. And so because of the power outage, it was made it difficult to reach out to family and friends over there. So there was literally a sense of not knowing, a sense of darkness in the world of communication. And I decided to try to interpret the only connection that we had at the time, which was the news and newspapers and journalism. And so a lot of the poems from the book were actually a response to the journalism that I was intaking at the time, in different forms, whether it's like erasure or different kinds of like hybrid forms of found poetry in that regard. But it was definitely something where I was like feeling hopeless. And instead of, when I was thinking of what to do, what do I do? And I think a lot of us as citizens kind of during that time period felt like, well, what can I do to help? And this was like my response, and what I actually knew, my path, I think, to serve the world is through this work. And so in that moment of being called, I think it led me to this book, and this book has led me to so many other things too. So
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So in a way, it sounds like the book was kind of an answer to the silence.
Yeah.
That you weren't hearing from your people. You probably were worried and scared for them. How did you use the newspaper? You said that a lot of this was from the articles you were reading.
Yeah.
What was the process for the poems then?
For sure, and there's very different process for different poems, but I think the research and the investigation of the process of writing the poems, it was the whole book itself, And so like there's some pieces in there that are literally, I take a newspaper article and kind of through erasure or like taking out of certain words, create like a narrative on top of that form. In the book, I use a lot of whiteout poetry in particular. So instead of like seeing black squares that kind of erase the poem, you'll just see these blank, empty spaces. But really, those are just kind of like a way of, just kind of making the text the same color as the page so it disappears. But so there's a little bit of that. There's some music, some lyrics, and some song lyrics, some by Nas and Nina Simone and different things like that, because I'm very much a musician, music lover, and former musician. So I kind of tap into those a lot. So sometimes it would be like, all right, let me take this article about a family who, was kicked out of their hotel that FEMA put them in, and I'll mix that with lyrics from a Nina Simone song, and I'll figure out where the poem is somewhere in between, That's just like one example. There's another poem in there where literally I took several articles and just made almost like a word bank, kind of composed of all the articles, and made a longer extended poem from them as well. But it's all kind of just process-based stuff, but it is it's the method to the madness,
I could be wrong, because you're dealing with incredibly serious content.
Yeah.
But there's, I don't know, to me, is there also an aspect of sort of play in that?
Yeah.
Kind of a little bit of tinkering and let's see what I can do if I smash up these various things?
Yeah, I think that's just me as an artist. I think I'm very much a playful artist. We were talking about earlier, I have my roots in theater in particular. Movement theater and devised spoken word kind of work for the stage and stuff. So I've found, all these different moments within my life, gathering together and building on these skills, these theatrical skills, and these storytelling. So like I'm always playing in that regard. And so on the page, I feel like I play as well. And I put that on my students a lot of the time. I tell them that it's our job to play as poets, right? That's if we don't, then we're not doing our job right, And we don't have a lot of rules. You know what I'm saying? As poets, we really don't. So play should be one of them. And if you're not trying to play, then you're probably in the wrong
I think
form.
that should be a life rule.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
And that's so true, actually, because my students as well, they take it, particularly, they'll play in fiction, but the moment it gets to poetry, it's like, now we must be profound.
Yeah.
And it's like, no. Like, that'll just happen. Yeah. But I feel like you have to often like really urge people to just say, it's okay. This is where you want to go.
Yeah.
When in the poems and in the book, did you feel kind of a responsibility to speak for those who quite literally were silenced because of the lack of communication, but also who might not be able to represent what was going on the way you could?
Yes, and also the feeling of knowing that I am not on the island, nor was I born on the island. So there's another level of responsibility too that I'm engaging with here to also make it really clear that this is someone's point of view from here. So that's why there is a lot of empty knowledge and the silent space, right? The empty space, right? And so the silence is a commentary, and it is hope in a theoretically, I represent a lot of other Puerto Ricans on the mainland at the time. So nor do I want this to be like, never did I want it to be like, here is from the island's perspective of what's going on, and I'm trying to hip you and enlighten you. It's the opposite. It's that I'm an American citizen, and there's so much that I don't know, and I'm here to tell you why. When there's my family over there, there's my peoples over there, why don't I know? Why is a president, shooting paper towel like a basketball into a crowd of people? Like where is the humanity in those moments, So I have both of those responsibilities, I think.
Oh, interesting. So it sounds like in a way you were very aware of not wanting to appropriate.
Yeah.
Was that conscious as you were writing, or was it just sort of that was the position you were in, so it kind of naturally flowed?
Yeah, I think both.
Yeah.
We're coming out of 2020. Like when this poem is kind of like in the process of the editing, when it's in the hands of the editors and stuff. It is pandemic time. It is summer of 2020. And so I think a whole country and maybe a whole world was kind of taking a temperature about who they were and what they were appropriating and blah, 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 and who they were in this universe, and in particular at this moment in time, from gender to ethnicity to all kinds of things people were reckoning with. And I wasn't, unique to that. Like I was part of that as well, and got to really understand myself as an identity, as a Puerto Rican man, that even within that identity, there's so many identities within that identity. And I think sometimes America can kind of push us into like a box of like trying to figure out, how do we figure you out? But I think the world is a little bit more nuanced than we'd like to admit.
Yeah, nicely said.
Yeah.
Do you want to share a poem?
Yeah, I'd love to. This poem, actually.
Too many to choose from, I know.
Well, I talked about this poem earlier, so I think it would be a good poem to read now.
Great.
But this poem is called Left the Hotel That FEMA Stopped Paying For on Friday. Ended up at a shelter after action, making the president look bad. Hibiscus yawns on a once road baked in clay. Cabo Rojo to Brooklyn. Trickle of feet is dewdrip. This is the first morning of homelessness. Making the president look bad. My family's everywhere. You see Taliana and her son FaceTiming Theo Cruz on the curb. Sol, Our Grand Marshal cries in Spanish in the wake, making the president look bad, and a warning by the unsung agency in the parade. In a hotel lobby by the airport, there is nowhere to warm, churn, a family laugh. There ain't goodwill for evicted psalms pinned, making the president look bad. Bluebirds saying everything they heard from someone else. The rent late, displaced on the balls of feet, trauma for thunder, Bruno, lying on asphalt, emergency lane, and we worry for the length of rest in a blanket of sirens, and the Atlantic Ocean ruins, and they build their beacon and cause the brick tower to deteriorate, and they lit a donation and welcome the street light, and ain't it hard just to live?
That's wonderful. You are such an amazing reader.
Thank you.
And so I actually wanted to ask, because the use of white space is so intriguing, and already you've been explaining it in ways that makes me want to go back and look at the poems. As a reader, how do you consider the white space on the page versus the performance of the poem as a reader?
Well, I think there's two truths. One is how I see the poem and how the reader sees the poem are individual things. And I can't concern myself with being the reader of the poem, you know, as the author of the poem so much. So there is a little bit of like understanding that some of these poems are treasure maps that I only know the code to. And so when I read them, people hear the poem in a different way than they read it before. They're like, oh, there is way more narrative in this or more spoken word in this than I thought by looking at it.
Yeah.
And I love that. And I love that surprise. And I think that I love to surprise people a little bit with that when it comes out onto the page. But I've also been spending some time trying to perform these poems. I spent some time at the Kennedy Center. They were able to take in some of my work and basically work on what this might look like on the stage, on top of just maybe reading these poems. And that process was about a week there that it really began to like lift these poems in a different way where I'm like, oh, there's a character even behind this, this voice of this poem.
So was this just you reading, or were they staging the poems?
It was for that workshop. It was just me, but I was staged. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So it was about maybe 8 to 10 minutes or so of just stylized physical theater with spoken word poetry from the book and
How
stuff.
did that feel?
Incredible. It's where my youth, where I come from in a lot of ways. I come from the spoken word scene.
Yeah.
Brave New Voices Youth Poetry Slam Festival and representing Wisconsin and then eventually the University of Wisconsin. But I kind of came into poetry as a form of spoken word play, competition, a lot of these like things that get you a little bit leaning forward in the work. And I think that you can see that even as I start writing more for the page, those habits are tough to break, and they're just a part of who I am.
I wanted to ask about that. I mean, because what is the transition from? Or do you start your poems, thinking your poems, performing your poems out loud, and then you start writing them down? Or is there a separation between performance poetry and page poetry for you? What's your process?
Yeah, I think the process is organic in that way, right? Where it fluctuates. I think that its response, it always starts on the page, but then there is a place where I'm reading to myself. I'm reading at open mics or trying a poem out in the same way that I learned from great stand-up comics. You got to work your material. You know what I mean? It just doesn't live on the page. So as a poet, I try to take that stand-up skill where it's like, oh yeah, we got to work it out. And so much when I read a poem, I'm like, ugh, extra words. You can feel them on your tongue, and you're just like, wow, I need to cut 8 of those words. You know what I mean? Or 3 of those lines.
Yeah.
Those illuminate, I think, when they're spoken, and you start to be in a little bit of conversation with yourself. That's when I can really lean into who am I as a listener, as a reader, outside of being a writer, those moments, and hopefully they inform it.
Well, that definitely begs the question, how have these other creative sides of yourself as an actor, as a director, as a spoken word artist informed your writing?
Yeah, for sure. As an actor, I am not afraid to jump in character or using different voices, explore setting, those kind of dramatic kind of things. I'm really interested in that. And in general, like, I think there's a level of empathy that kind of like really locks in when you're an actor and a director as well, just a poet too, but a different kind, whether you're literally putting yourself in the body of someone else, or putting a story in your arms as a director, and you have to carry that story, even though there's other genders and ethnicities and things in it, you have so much to carry for everyone. I find that responsibility even in a poem as well, where it's just like, there is a responsibility here to tell a story. Why do I have to tell this story? What's the urgency behind it? Those questions live in my poems as much as they do in any work that I would like to direct, you know?
Yeah. What was the hardest part of writing the book?
Hardest part of writing the book was probably the emotional turmoil that comes along with the pandemic, you know, and the post-pandemic stuff. That was very difficult, you know, just looking back on it. I think obviously pressure makes diamonds and stuff, and I think that in the sense of the exploration and the research that really went into the book, I'm really proud of what it is. And hopefully I can find this avenue in this kind of research path to kind of find other books and other stories to tell as well.
The Hurricane Maria was 2017?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the book came out in 2021, yes? Because it was about a very specific event, found in that, did you feel pressure to get the book out fast? Like this is going to move too far into the past at all?
Yeah, well, one, you know this with books, there's no such thing as fast. And so books are a long form, you know what I mean? Not only that, in the way that they come out, they take years to come out. And even when they come out, they take years for anybody to care, you know? So I knew that. Part of my service, I think, toward this artistic practice was documentation. I wanted to be a witness, even if I wasn't able to witness, like literally, physically there. But here is, like, I was here, I witnessed, I'll never forget. And hopefully anybody who has the book kind of has that feeling as well. There's a book by, oh my goodness, by the author of Blood Dazzler.
Oh, Patricia
Smith,
Oh, yeah.
So Patricia Smith has Blood Dazzler, and that was a poem that, I mean, a unit of poems, a book that was just blew me away, and it was literally a backbone to a lot of this process.
I just taught it in my class.
Yeah, brilliant.
It's amazing.
And it really shows you as a poet how to explore entry points, multiple entry points within a certain topic in order to expand on that topic and to really dive into that. And now I would be, lying if I said that wasn't a backbone to like a lot of the research and stuff that I did in a North Star of like, okay, where is something that is important? And it's like, even though that book, came out after the fact, it's a documentation of history, and it's a beautiful one at that.
Yeah, and I know we actually had Patricia Smith here on the show.
Nice.
As a former journalist, pulling a lot from the articles in the newspaper coverage as well. Yeah. We talked about the idea that this is a chapbook, so it's a little bit shorter than a full-length collection, although it's always very flexible how people define that. But you think of this as part of a larger project, don't you?
Yeah, I just have a small goal to before any of my full lengths come out. I don't have a full length yet. I want this to be the first of like a trilogy of chapbooks that come out.
All around the same sort of theme and subject matter?
Absolutely not. So like this is gonna kind of live on its own as its own documentation of moment in time. The next project, which is called The Bounce, and it is a nostalgic kind of retelling a little bit of my personal histories with a little bit of magic and things like that in between there. But it's more personal. This is a book in which I was able to kind of get outside of my body, use the world to talk about myself, while this next book is really going to be like, here's me and my family, and it's about myself, right? So it's a much more
We'll
selfish.
be interested to see what you do on the third one then.
Yeah, for sure, for sure, for sure.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
and good luck. I can't wait. When are we hoping to have the second book out?
This should be scheduled for the end of this year, so November, December.
Wonderful. Also from Finishing Line Press.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Karl. It's been such a pleasure talking.
Thank you.
Well, we're going to take a short break. Please rejoin us after this break when we will be talking to yet another absolutely wonderful poet. So see you in a bit.
Discover limitless opportunities at Brookdale, ranked the #1 community college in New Jersey. Unlock your potential with nearly 70 associate degree programs, including cutting-edge courses in our cybersecurity center, and join our competitive esports team. Elevate your educational journey with Transfer Pathways, now connecting you to a variety of prestigious New Jersey universities and colleges. Brookdale, where access, affordability, and support open doors to your future. Visit brookdalecc.edu today.
Hi, I'm Christine Webster Hansen, Dean of the Humanities Institute at Brookdale. This is where students come to experience what it means to be human in mind, body, spirit, and emotion, where they celebrate the beauty of art and the depths of culture, all while gaining the skills that employers want, the ability to solve problems, think critically, and feel empathetically. Here, we offer an Associate of Arts degree in Humanities, which is perfect for students who are undecided in their majors, but who want an education in a diverse array of subjects in one highly transferable degree. We also offer degrees in fine arts, interior design, graphic design, game design, digital animation, photography, theater, architecture, music, and music technology. We have courses in international programs, literature, and gender studies. Here, students can learn to speak and write articulately. We offer an intellectually invigorating environment with a committed faculty who are here to give you a once-in-a-lifetime educational experience. So don't miss out. Enroll today. We can't wait to meet you.
Hi, and welcome back to the Brookdale Visiting Writer Series show. My name is Suzanne Parker. I direct our creative writing program, and we have in our second half of the show the wonderful poet Alina Pleskova, who is a poet, editor, and Moscow-born immigrant turned proud Philadelphian. She's a Leeway Foundation grant awardee, and her chapbook, What Urge Will Save Us, is out along with her new wonderful book, Tosca, which is her first full-length collection. So, Alina, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thanks for joining us. So will you tell us about the book? It just came out this last June, right, from Deep Vellum? Mm-hmm. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
How has it been feeling to have your first full-length collection out?
Absolutely bewildering.
Really?
I found out, 2 weeks ago that it got nominated for a Lambda
Oh, congrats.
prize. Thank you.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And something about that really, prizes are prizes, but just like the thought of it being perceived out in the world by people who don't know me, like bestowing this.
And the Lambda Literary Award is an amazing award to be nominated for.
Yeah, it's a huge honor.
Yeah.
Yeah, happy to be in the room with all these people. But yeah, being a poet, it's like you're scribbling away and like you do readings, but it's sort of like, it's like a dislocating feeling. But something about the book, just like traveling so far away from me has been really bewildering. Like I said, I can't think of a different word for it.
Oh, that's wonderful. Can you tell us about the poems in the book?
Sure. So Tosca, or Toska, if you like, comes from a Russian word, toskat, which is like, it's kind of like a Portuguese saudade or like a French ennui, kind of an existential weariness. And in Russian, like toskat is to drag something heavy around. So it's like the feeling of being burdened by something spiritual, like in your soul. It's such a Russian word. And not knowing, or not being able to identify like one cause of it. And so that's the really buoyant topic from which this entire collection sprang. So kind of thinking about, the late capitalist, mess that we're in as a culture in America, also as an immigrant, always feeling like I'm kind of, it's a bit cliche to say, but, I don't belong to one culture or another. Like neither feels exactly right. So where is home? What is my identity? Also as a queer person. And And as a bisexual person specifically, again, feeling like I'm sort of, between sexualities, this feeling always of like kind of liminality in betweenness and unmoored and unsettledness and kind of interrogating that. But also I think there is buoyancy and sort of thinking about, okay, if I'm feeling this way, if, everything seems so bleak and hopeless and overwhelming, what do we have? And I think where I land, not to spoil anything, but in here there's lots of, strains of collective care, mutual care, those things I think can get us through this feeling of toska.
Yeah. Do you speak Russian?
I do.
Oh, so you're fluent as well?
Yeah, I mean,
Roughly fluent?
Fluent the way that we're called heritage speakers, so someone who
Yes.
learned the language, outside of formal institution. And so the Russian that I have is the exact vocabulary that like my parents have. So I often sound really like stilted and formal when I speak because, language is so fluid and it moves
Yeah.
on without you. So I haven't lived in Russia for so long. So slang, idiomatic expressions, things like that are sort of not in my word supply. So I sound really silly when I speak it, I think, to like a native speaker.
Yeah. Russian is such a rich language, though, because words can be read with so many different sets of associations and the like. A friend of mine was translating Russian, and someone was like, if you're not Russian and you don't speak Russian fluently, you're never going to get the depth of this language. Oh, that's interesting. I wanted to think, actually, your relationship to form. It's really interesting reading through the collection. You've got prose blocks. You've got one poem, I'm trying to think, I think it's This Day is a Wish with the repeated one word in the left column, and then the small blocks of text here. You've got single lines, and then lots of poems and couplets. So I'm just wondering if form is an important vehicle for the poem for you, because I think a lot of poems, there's not as much variety, especially in a first book.
Yeah,
I should a first full-length collection, because you do have the chapbook. I shouldn't say first book.
It feels like so long ago. But yeah, I'm so married to the couplet. Actually, in a workshop that I was in a manuscript development workshop with the poet Ted Reese, who was brilliant. Everyone in that cohort was brilliant. And they really took me to task about that, where they were like, Alina, you have to do something else.
Oh, really?
Because either make this a whole book of couplets and that's its thing, or, try some other things. So partly, I do love a prose poem too, but partly playing with form was born out of that self-consciousness, and they were right, because there's something so propulsive to me about the couplet, the way you sort of, associatively leap, like you get these two lines and then carry into the next, and it really mirrors the way that I think, and the way that I write mirrors the way that I think. I try to write poems that read like someone speaking to you, like as if you're talking to a friend on the phone or something. And so I have trouble sometimes with formal constraints, I guess, or like tricks, or like, something about it, instead of feeling expansive, feels like a container, whereas like couplets just feel like they mirror like the way that I naturally would think and write.
Oh, that's so interesting, because to me, I think of couplets as little rooms.
Yeah.
Like there's a little room. But and the poems they flow. There's so much energy in your work, and I hear what you're saying, like it's like you're talking to your friend. And the poems kind of curve, and that to me makes me think that the form would be one rush down the page. But the couplets, is it important to you to create that pause or that space in there?
I think so. There's something about, I think I've always had trouble with like metered stuff as a ESL speaker, like the way that I pronounce words, or because I learned English mostly through reading, I think. It doesn't quite work for me to map, that kind of syllabic counting onto like the way that I speak. And so I've had to like come up with different ways of like deciding when to end a line. And often it's, the classic, a breath, or like if I read it out loud, where does it make sense to pause, or sometimes like for some kind of effect, like comedic effect, I think I do sometimes. Or like it sounds like I'm about to like say something serious, and then it segues into a joke, and that's the line break. Like being playful like that.
Yeah. What is your process for writing?
I wish. Would that I had one. I borrow a lot, formally, topically, kind of vibe-wise from the New York School writers who were very much like poetry is part of daily life is
like
part
Frank
of poetry.
O'Hara here.
Yes. Oh, I'm obsessed with Frank. I have a Frank O'Hara tattoo. It was like everything
Really?
for me. Yeah. As much as like I come from a culture that reveres poetry, Russian people, obsessed. There's like statues of poets in Moscow, as I say in the book. But the New York school like really broke open for me the idea that kind of poetry is part of daily life, and my process is the same. So like my practice is part of my daily life. I'm sitting on the trolley and jotting in my notes app, or I'll come from a reading and just be buzzing and sort of start writing as I'm walking. It's never been something that can be separate, to my own detriment probably. If I had a more rigid practice, maybe I would get more done. But it feels like that's the only way that it's ever really worked for me. I've done residencies and things where I just feel like I'm wasting the time because I'm just like sitting there and like staring out the window instead of like being at the desk showing up doing the work. But that's not how poems arrive to me either. So
it sounds like you're writing all day long in a way.
In a way, like in the background, I think.
Yeah. Once you have a draft done, you talked about you went to well, how did this collection of poems build and develop?
Oh, fits and starts. It was, my day job doesn't have much to do with poetry, so it was a lot about borrowing time, stealing time, carving out time. I think there was one poem, no, I'm certain there was one poem where I pulled over at the side of the road. I was driving to upstate New York and I pulled over and I wrote the poem. Like, it just sort of kept happening that way, kind of like the poet Jack Spicer talks about poets being like radios who just like intercept transmissions. It feels that way. Like I get a signal and then I have to do something with the signal and then I wait for another signal. And then of course there's the editing and everything after, but.
Yeah. How did you know you had a collection then?
Oh, it felt like I just had enough poems to
Well, I think a lot of us, it's like, well, there's 80 of these, so let's see what they look like together.
Yeah, and you know what else happens? Perhaps it's happened to you too, where like you do readings and things long enough and people start to ask where your book is. And you feel like, oh, maybe I should have one. Gotcha. And I think that manuscript development workshop really got me there, where everyone there was like, yeah, this is a book, Alina. Like, it's cohesive. And I was like, okay.
What was the most challenging part then of putting it together? Was it writing things that weren't in couplets?
It was definitely that, and partly I think I think it's like the punk in me always like resists like a known or established way of doing things. I really wanted to resist the idea that the collection, even though I talked about its aboutness at the beginning of this conversation, had to have like a thematic arc necessarily, or like every poem had to speak to the same theme, and I struggled with that. I pushed back to my editor a little bit when he was like, maybe more poems about this. And I'm like, no, there are no more poems about this, because if there were, I would have written that, you know, kind of like trusting my like instinctual ideas about like what poems I could produce in a certain time span, and then like just being like, okay, we're done, and stopping there.
How did you decide the organization?
Oh, vibes, vibes based, I mean, tonally, I think the book kind of does a little wavy pattern where there'll be like moments of like levity, moments of seriousness, and sort of toggling back and forth between that. The opening and closing ones I kind of like knew right away what would bookend the collection, so that helped.
Yeah, I've heard the, stand at the top of the stairs, throw them down, and the order you pick them up in is the order of your poems.
I love stuff like that. I'm very...
No, but it never actually works, right?
But I like to believe in the like mysticalness and ineffability of some aspects of this. As much as I take the craft super seriously, it feels important to me to like carve out this like area of my practice that's just like, I don't know, I gotta feel it out. I'm such an air sign, I don't know.
I'm wondering if you could read, and I love the opening lines of Take Care, just sort of, and I've kind of marked it, if you wouldn't mind, because I would love to talk about that.
Take care. I've been trying to remember where I am. On the phone, I said, this feeling is so familiar, like a long drive and no recollection of steering. There's never an arrival point, only endurance and the occasional sensation of re-entry into what kind of world this is.
Oh, that's just gorgeous. And that's if I remember correctly, the opening poem to the book. I've been trying to remember where I am. That seems to really speak to what you're talking about, in the sense of I'm not quite here and I'm not quite there. And this idea of locating yourself in the world, but in the world being also in different identities, it seems. Was that something you consciously wanted to speak to in the book?
I think so, in that, like, one can't separate themselves from their identity. And I think when I was a kid, I didn't understand what that feeling was tied to. Like, I couldn't have said then that, like, oh, it's because I'm an immigrant and I feel dislocated, or because of my sexuality, or because of XYZ. But as I've gotten older, I think I've always felt a little bit elsewhere. And I think it's also just my personality. Like, I'm quite spacey. I feel like I'm always like hovering above my life a bit. Maybe this is a poetry.
It might be a poet thing.
Our capacity to observe, unfortunately, also is a contingent on us
There's a
being
certain detachment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And sort of, so like when I say I've been trying to remember who I am, it's like, I mean, this poem was written during the pandemic when I really felt like dislocated in space and time, but it's just like a constant through line in my life, almost like metaphorically and like literally, of like, what is going on?
Well, I wonder too, because with the publication date, this would imply that some of these are COVID poems. And was the work influenced by that?
I think so. I mean, it was the first time I could really like, a lot of this book too is like just espousing my kind of like discontentment and resentment of how much of life work takes out of us, you know, and if one is lucky, maybe the work is something that one enjoys. If one is not so lucky, it's like there's just entire sections of the day that are spent getting ready for the thing, doing the thing, recovering from the thing, and then like what's left over, you know. And the pandemic, like a lot of people, you know, and I will also say that I'm like a white collar worker, so there's that. I like had a different experience of the pandemic that people with other kinds of jobs, you know, didn't have, but I had time and space. I got to like, my favorite thing to do, I was being interviewed for a podcast and they were like, what's your favorite hobby? What do you like to do? I was like, walk around, literally. And I got to do that so much, and I got to hear myself think, and I got to read so much. And it really like fed into the generative process of working on the book. And like, I'm making it sound wonderful. Of course, there were parts of the pandemic that we would never want back, right? Worrying about everyone you love dying.
But I think that forced confinement had challenges, and but also, you know, I had a friend who wrote 2 books.
Yeah.
Of prose, not poems, and you know, just it was that for us. You know, maybe this is the poet's version of learning how to make bread. Bake bread.
Oh, I did that too. I got into
did you?
embroidery, all sorts of things. But it also, you know, brought forth like themes in the book about like collective care and like community care too, where it was like, oh, all we have is each other, and if we don't treat each other well, then we're really screwed because, you know, the politicians don't care about us, like the systems don't care about us. We have to care for each other, hopefully, if we're going to get through this.
Well, I thought it was really interesting that, I mean, the book really challenges us, the idea of capitalism is the way, you know, and, you know, strive and you will be able to, in essence, buy yourself the perfect life. And I find that that's unbelievably refreshing. You know, you rarely read somebody truly saying, what is the value of this way of life? Do you feel like possibly having parents who immigrated, that there was enough sort of difference that you were able to look at this maybe with enough detachment to pose those questions?
You know,
Would that have fed into it?
I think about this a lot. Like, I don't know where I came from in that sense because, you know, classic, you know, first gen and also eldest daughter syndrome of like a lot of guilt about we brought you to this country so that you would have a better life, which means, you know, material success.
Go make yourself a better life.
A certain narrow conception of what that means, you know, doctor or lawyer being like the 2, you know, viable career paths that one should take. And my younger sister went into pharma and like, you know, got married, bought a house, did all the things that like were the return on the investment of the parents who like came here. And, you know, my dad was a cab driver for many years. My mom cleaned houses and worked in nail salons, like did all sorts of things to like try to establish some kind of upward class mobility for us. And then I go and be like, I don't want any of that, you know, like, and like with all gratitude and respect and all of that for what they did, it didn't instill in me, you know, I think I have a decent work ethic, but I don't want to apply it to in service of capital, I guess, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, like, it's nice to have a nice house and everything, but I guess I've never been a striver in that way.
Would you consider your work political?
I think so.
I mean, particularly in this moment too, you know, some of the identities you kind of speak to being Russian or a Russian immigrant when you were a very young child, queerness, I mean, within literally, you know, international politics right now and with what's going on in the U.S., those have become quite politicized identities in a way. Do you struggle with that as a writer? Like, I don't want to do that. I just want to write.
I mean, I think I just end up landing on, like, I'm just going to write. I kind of come from the same tradition of poets like June Jordan, not comparing myself to her in any way, God, I wish, but like that everything in your lived experience is political by virtue of who you are. And so writing about your life is a political act because, you know, unless you're very, very much the status quo in every way, there's something political in what you're saying because, you know, the established order of things is not working for you. It's not benefiting people who are marginalized, whether that's, you know, racially, in terms of like sexual orientation, economically. Certainly, I think there's a lot of class rage in this book and a lot of like desire for, like real earnest desire for revolution and also like the idea, as I say in the book, like I want the class wars to start, but we're all tired. So like, you know, and I mean that not as a resignation, as just like a sort of, we're going to do it anyway, but God, we're tired.
Well, why don't we finish up with a poem? Will you share one for us?
Sure. So speaking of all that, I suppose I'm going to read a poem called Re Eros. Do I look alive enough out here? Crushed velvet, signaling my intent to be devoured, undone, etc. Whatever else shows veritable effort. I want useless splendor, to be as carried off with rapture as the woman who kissed a Twombly hanging in a gallery later said, it was a gesture of love. I did not think it out carefully. I want the class wars to start, but everyone's so tired. All these neologisms for disruption and innovation, and still not a soul I know confuses precarity with play. Eros, I've looked for you all over. Our totalitarian state glitched out my libido, and I give over whole afternoons to huffing lavender, hitting up ghoulish senators, browser history littered with herbal elixirs and all the things I should know how to do by now. All around me, women grip the buoys of their autonomy to stay afloat until personhood washes up on the shores of no nation. I stockpile intimacies almost too ephemeral to clock. Strangers act so kind whenever I wear this ridiculous pom-pom hat, and old friends use my name's diminutive, and some lovers leave a glass of lemon water by the bed, my body carved with red filigree. Desire doesn't aspire to anything other than itself. I don't miss so-and-so, just being seen in that way, just having an unholy place to rest, set all this down.
Oh, thank you. What a beautiful poem. And what a beautiful book. Thank you for joining us so much. Thank you. Everyone, I've been speaking with Alina Pleskova, and her wonderful new book is called Tosca. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you'd like to know more about creative writing classes or the creative writing community here at Brookdale Community College, please check us out on our website. We would love to have you come join us. So thanks for watching.